Welcome to the Leading Generations podcast from Antioch Bible Baptist Church in Gladstone, Missouri. Each week, the podcast focuses on helping our church family live out its mission of leading generations to make disciples of Jesus Christ everywhere. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to our Leading Generation podcast. So glad you're here with us. Last week, we started part one of a two-part series talking through the book Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And Micaela Walker, our elementary ed director, is joining us on the podcast. So Micaela, thanks again for being here and helping us think through this book that has really been influential in our culture over the last couple of years. And it was just good for us to sort of lay the foundation last week of thinking first about the fact that it comes from a man-centered worldview versus a biblical worldview and the difference of those, and then summarizing the book. So last week we summarized the book. How would you summarize the book just to, for those who maybe haven't seen the first episode, first part, give us a quick overview of the book.
Yeah. I do think you should watch the first part because this is high level already. But in summary, this author does a good job of giving us information of social media and smartphones create negative mental health outcomes in teenagers and children. We're seeing that in Generation Z, and now we have the responsibility to do something about it. We no longer have the excuse of we didn't know it was harmful. The data is here, so how are we going to respond? Is how I would probably describe this.
Yeah, that's good. I like, and I mentioned this last episode, but that statement he makes, we're overprotective in the real world and underprotective in the virtual world. And so I think that summarizes.
Yeah, he goes back to that point a lot.
And then we talked about last week the usefulness of the book. So why is this book useful as followers of Jesus and as parents, grandparents? Why is this book useful to us?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is we are called to disciple our kids, and this is affecting our kids. So we need to be aware and informed, and this gets that conversation going of how harmful this can be if we're not paying attention to the signs of addiction or the dangerous parts of this. We are not doing our kids a service by just pretending that's not happening, right? We need to be aware of the dangers of social media and smartphones, and especially in those sensitive years of our children's lives, right? So that it's important. And this conversation is started really well in this book, but it's also practical. It gives those like 4 key points of let's keep smartphones away from our kids until high school. Let's keep them off social media until 16. Let's give those young kids chances for free play and risky play, and the dangerous play is good for them. And then let's keep phones out of schools. And so it's practical too. And I think it's a good starting point of what are we going to do with this information now? I think this book does a good job of talking about it.
Yeah, it does. So today we want to really, bring it down to what are some positive takeaways that we could say from the book, again, without somebody having to read it necessarily, so you don't got to go through the 300 plus pages of a lot of data in there. It's not necessarily a fun, easy read. But what are some positive takeaways? And then we'll get to, what are some warnings maybe if you do read the book, or negative things that we would point out as well. And then we'll sort of wrap everything up. So let's start with some positive takeaways. What would be some things from the book that you would say this is positive for us to consider and think about?
Yeah, you mentioned it just now, but this is not you don't walk away from this book feeling encouraged and lighthearted. This is not a light book. This is a serious topic. It's got serious consequences, and he takes it seriously. However, I was encouraged specifically by his chapter on spirituality, which is ironic. He's an atheist. And maybe that's part of why I liked this chapter. But he terms it religious practices when he talks about this, because he's not going to... He doesn't believe in God, so he doesn't have any affiliation to any agenda here with the church, right? But he says that people who participate in religious practices of community have far better mental health outcomes and significantly reduced loneliness. His exact words were, people who live Only in networks rather than communities are less likely to thrive, and people who break bread, he uses the term break bread together, have a bond, and this is a deficiency that the virtual world could never overcome. Wow. I read that from an atheist who felt so compelled to include that in this book because he cannot help but recognize that God had a plan when he designed the church, right? That's encouraging to say God knew what was best for us. Jesus Christ died for the church, not for internet access, right? Because God knew that that's best spiritually, physically, but also mentally, that the church is good for us. And this is one of those like science is catching up to the Bible thing. But I love reading that because that's encouraging that this book is kind of weighty, but as Christians, we can take heart that prioritizing involvement in our local church is good for us. It's good for our kids. And there's hope there. Yeah. That an atheist probably wasn't intending to give to Christians reading the book, but I took that very encouraging takeaway of we're doing this intentionally. He quoted Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It was that part of check the log in your own eye before the speck in your brother's, right? And he's talking about that, basically saying that's a good principle that Jesus is talking about, right? We should probably follow. That's wise, it seems. But he says, it's wise to look honestly at your own life before judging others, yet social media is training us to do the exact opposite, right? Social media is not a mirror for us. It's a one-way glass where we can just look at other people's lives and judge accordingly. I like the shows, for example, where they're selling like multi-million-dollar homes. Find that very compelling. But I'll sit there. I'll catch myself sitting there, arms folded, going, that kitchen tile is just atrocious. And these are $20 million homes that they're trying to sell. Like we are judging these lives that we have no right to judge. But it's opposite of what Jesus is telling us to do. It's opposite of what we're meant to do. And yet social media is like, this is great for you. And it's not, right? And that's encouraging. That's a positive takeaway because it's very clear that there is a better way and God has that outlined for us and he brings attention to that. I love that part of the book. Very cool part of the book to read from an atheist again. I think is very intriguing that he could see that. So
I agree with you. That whole religious practice section was like, man. And that's where
you're so close.
Right? Yeah. And that's where he even in parentheses says, and I'm an atheist, right? Like it was just like, man, the data is even pointing you to that this is not about, there's a God who created you. He created you for community. And, in this virtual world, we're missing that real community. Right. It grieved my heart to read that when he was talking about that, but also like, man, this is where the data is pushing you to the importance of being a part of a church family, the importance of, again, our kids ministry, our student ministry, having your kids and students be a part of that is just huge to their development. We know their spiritual development, but I mean, he would even say their physical, social development, mental development. It's important for them to be a part of that. It's like there was a divine designer, who knew what he was doing and what he said. But again, I do think that was a really positive takeaway.
Absolutely.
From that, and then that idea of judging others. I think again, seeing social media is really a one-way street in our hearts is a good thing, because when you're scrolling, you in that moment you have the opportunity to heart it or to not heart it, or to like it, to not like it, to
comment something on it, whatever.
So it is a very interesting thing that it's done to our hearts and our lives that we have to be aware of and watch out for that. All right, so those are some good positive things about that. Again, he ends there with religious practices, and then this idea of just seeing it for what it is, a one-way street. What are some warnings that you would have about the book? Again, thinking this idea of we want to be critical readers, thinkers as well. So I tend to be a guy, just read a book for face value and just enjoy the book. And I don't tend to go critical in my thinking, but if we're going to read a book like this, somebody's going to read it, what are some warnings that you would have for them?
Yeah. Critical reader, we should be probably of anything, even if it's a theologian's book, right?
Sure,
If it's
right.
not scripture, we should be at least critical to some degree.
Yeah.
But especially for this one, you mentioned this at some point, but the evolution talk, right? That's like the dangling carrot. As a Christian who reads that, you see that and your warning flags are going off.
Right.
We know that God created man fully formed in his image on the sixth day, right? There was no like evolution of that process. We are divinely created, right? We know that. So when we see his talk of evolution, we know that that's not right. I think the more dangerous and sneaky part that we need to be critical of is this whole book, I mean, starting from the title, is talking about mental health. It's talking about this psychological, like, evaluation of humanity, but it's written from someone who does not have God in mind. And so there is an undertone of the cause of anxiety and the solution to anxiety that all is devoid of God. And I think that's can be dangerous if we don't read it going into it knowing that this is lacking the ultimate solution, right? It's a good starting point, but to finish this book and say, I know everything I need to fix this is, I think, dangerous as a Christian. We need to be very wary as we read this, that when he says social media causes anxiety, it's surrounded by compelling data of 2010 social media and smartphones handed to these teenagers. Their mental health like negatives are skyrocketing, right? We see that, and I found myself nodding along going, yeah, you're right. But it's only half the picture, because I think biblically speaking, I mean, social or anxiety starts in our hearts, right? A quote that I had come across, it was Dr. Nicholas Ellen, but he says, anxiety is when I am consumed with ungodly fear of not getting what I want, losing what I have, or receiving something I don't want, instead of trusting God and accepting what he allows. That's the heart of where anxiety is coming from. So therefore, social media is more of a vehicle that throws a bunch of consumption in your face that like expedites this desire to have what you can't have or to not lose what you want. It's a fast paced, like speed bullet train vehicle, right? And it's this large amounts of information just being bombarded in our faces. And so we see the connection, the correlation of why anxiety is skyrocketing. But I don't think it fully explains the fact that that starts in our hearts. We want what we can't have. And social media is just showing you a lot of that stuff that you can't have, right? And so I want to be careful to just, I think it's oversimplistic to say that's the cause of it, because that devoids our responsibility and accountability that we're not trusting God with his good plans for our life, right?
Yeah, it takes me back to Genesis chapter 3, right? Like, how did the devil tempt Adam and Eve?
Dangled something they couldn't have, right?
Yeah. It was like, you obviously God doesn't want you to be like him, right? And so there's a temptation that comes there. So again, it's funny, nothing new under the sun, right? So it's like all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. You see some of this, you see this going on through Satan and his work with Adam and Eve.
I think, So I just, when you read this, I would be cautious, because at the end of the day, if social media just vanished tomorrow, I don't think it's going anywhere. Let's be clear. But even if it did, anxiety will find root somewhere else in your children. So we can't think that if we protect them from this, then we've done our job of shepherding their hearts against anxiety. Because biblically speaking, I mean, do not fear, do not worry. It's a very common command in scripture, right? And it's always coupled with, because God is there, right? Like, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. The Lord your God will be with you, right? That's what we see over and over in scripture. And so we need to teach our kids that no matter what he gives us, whatever he doesn't give us, God is with you, and it's a good plan for you, right? And that's the whole picture of the conversation that this book is lacking, that I think we need to go in mindful of before we pick up this book.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Any other things that you see from the book that are warning signs?
I think that's the big one, right? And mental health is just such a common theme throughout the book that I think we just have to be careful to accept it at face value. Because again, it's really lacking the hope that we have in Christ. When you only talk about the cause of anxiety being here, it makes it, I think you could respond one of two ways. Either feel like, oh, well, easy enough. I can make sure that never happens, right? Or being so overwhelmed because these technological giants have all this influence in our children's life, and it can cause like paranoia and a ungodly fear in our own hearts of they can't survive this, and that's not fair either. That's not true either. And so I think we got to be careful how we approach it. But
that's a good warning for us all. I was thinking when you were talking, just that idea of Proverbs talks about the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, right? So we always have to come back to our relationship with God. And again, as parents, it's easy to, like, his 4 steps of don't give them the phone till they're 16 and all those kind of things to be like, or don't give them social media, however that, the things he talks about, that is going to, all of a sudden our kids won't struggle with things, right? Well, no, we know we live in a broken world. Again, this is where the gospel comes into play, right? Like, we're made for a relationship with God. Man sinned, that relationship broke. Jesus came to fix the relationship. Our response is belief and faith in him. And so we have to understand, even if social media were to disappear, phones were to disappear tomorrow, there's still going to be struggles with anxiety. There's still going to be struggles with depression. But as parents, and as if students are listening to this, we do make choices, right?
Absolutely.
As well, that lead us down that path. And so I think it's important when we're setting up guardrails in our life, again, wanting to live a life fearing God, living for his glory, that these are good guardrails that we can set up that will protect us from these off-ramps to these areas of our life that we don't want to necessarily go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Just sort of finishing our conversation here. Where would you sort of land practically, thinking about your own heart in life, your own parenting? Where would you end our conversation in regards to the anxious generation, thinking about our families, our kids, our own heart and life?
Yeah, I think just after reading this book, right, as a parent, but then anyone listening who's a grandparent, if you're a teacher in one of our kids' classrooms, right, we need to start by being good role models of healthy phone usage. That seems simple, but it is, I think, a very important starting point of when we're in the classrooms and we're scrolling on our phones while kids are trying to, even here, right, we're trying to tell them about Jesus, and we have teachers in the back scrolling on their phones. That's communicating to them that there's something more important on their phone than being present in the classroom to hear about Jesus. When we're, as a parent, sitting on a couch while our kids are trying to play with us, if we're scrolling our phone, that's saying what I see here is more important than you, right? And that there's a accountability that I think we need to take, of that we need to set good role models so that when they do get their smartphone, inevitably, when they one day are able to use this, that we have modeled what that looks like healthily for them. And when I picked up this book, I thought it was going to be like a parenting book for this next generation, how to raise them. And it is part of that. But I am also Gen Z, and I'm part of this anxious generation. I did not actually anticipate being called out the way I was when I read this book. Very challenging, very convicting, in good ways. But it was a self-evaluation of my own heart of there are effects and evidence in my life of the dependence I found myself on social media during some of those primitive years as a young teenage girl, right? There were some negative side effects that I'm still trying to replace with Christ in my heart, right? This book does a good job talking about all the ways to put off like social media, but like Ephesians 4, that put on is lacking here. And so I think, again, as you read this book, to model, to put off, to take away the reliance on social media and smartphones, but then to replace that with Christ is, I think, the most important takeaway, that we are shepherding our children to fear God and to love him first and all that. Does that make sense?
Like, I think we should be able to say to our kids in every area of our life, come follow me as I follow Christ. Right. So I think especially when it comes to our use of social media and our iPhones, we should be able to say, come follow me as I follow Christ. So I think that is a challenging part of it. It's to read this book, and again, I think he does a good job of not pointing fingers and
Yep.
things, but it's like we can't be upset with our kids or
Right.
mad about their use of iPhones and social media when we're modeling for them
Yep.
a dependence on it, when we don't ever plug our phones in.
Right.
I think just a good book that has popped in my head, I read it several years ago now, but it's called The Tech Wise Family by Andy Crouch. And one of the takeaways that I had from that book was having in your home places where there's not social media or iPhones or technology in general. So like in our home, that's the dinner table.
Sure.
Like when we sit down for breakfast, when we sit down for dinner, a lot of times lunch obviously is school and things. So, but if we try to always have breakfast together, we try to always have dinner together. When we do that, the table is a phone-free zone.
I love that.
So but that just doesn't go for the kids. That
Right.
goes for
Absolutely.
Ruth and I
Yep.
as well. We're plugging our phones in. They're sitting over in on the counter away from us
Yeah.
because we want that place to be a time that we can talk and not be interrupted by our phones. So
Right.
again, I think we've got to model that.
We
for
do.
them. And again, we fail all the time.
Of
There's
course.
times that I get into doom scrolling
I
or
know.
whatever in my own heart and life. And
Yeah.
I have boundaries set up on my phone so that I
do
don't
too.
spend too much time on social media because I
Yeah.
know what it does to my heart.
Yeah.
And talking about that with our kids, I think is important. Like, hey, we struggle with that too. And
Yeah.
here's how we're seeking to overcome it.
Right.
Excuse me. I think that will help with
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
But thanks for that good challenge
Yeah.
of we've got to model it as parents.
I also just want to throw out
Yeah.
a small caveat before I just go out and say, you should all read this book.
Sure.
I don't know if that's particularly helpful for everyone. I do think what we've covered in these 2 episodes is a good spark notes of this
Yeah.
book. I think a lot of it, you get the bullet points, you get the idea. I'm not saying you can't read the book, but I do think that might be sufficient. I think as a mom, especially who has struggled with anxiety, still battling that, still turning that over to the Lord on a daily basis to hold my kids' lives in His hands, right? I want to be cautious of those who are watching who might also be in that season where you're already consumed with all of these fears and what ifs and possible bad scenarios. I think the amount of information that we have accessible to us can be so helpful and so useful if we use it with self-control and with open curiosity. But what I have found, at least in my own heart, is sometimes it leads into more of an abyss where you start spiraling because you crave more information because this is scary. And sometimes it feels like the more information you have, the more you can control your fear. If you understand a subject fully, then it can't be so scary. And I think that's a lie, but I think it's one that the internet and social media is throwing in our faces, that you need to know everything about everything in order to be in control. And this topic probably would have sent me into a spiral about 5 years ago if someone had put this book in my hand.
Yeah.
I don't think I was ready for this conversation 5 years ago.
Sure.
And so I want to be at least cautious and mention the fact that maybe right now the Spark Notes is perfectly sufficient. I still think the call to be aware, to be responsible, to model that healthy phone usage, but also to talk about what guardrails is your family going to have to protect your kids and shepherd them and disciple them. How are you going to handle it? I think that's important. I think that's a conversation, regardless of where you're at, is important to be having. But I do want to put that disclaimer on: this book can be heavy, and I don't know if it would be helpful for everybody, at least right now in their season. So,
Sure. Yeah. That's, I think, a good encouragement and warning.
Sure.
Like, to know where your heart is, and it's just not for the light read, right?
It is
like,
not.
It is. It is heavy
It
because
is.
you got to do something with the information
You do.
when you get it. So
letting
us sort of dig into that and say, here's at a high level, I think is a good,
and then
good
turning
reminder.
it back to Christ, right?
That's
Because
right.
He's the hope at the end of this day that the book never mentions, is that there is hope here. And
That's right.
victory is the Lord's, right? And so
Yeah.
we don't have to live in fear, but we do have to be responsible.
Yep. So I think it is a good conversation that we would encourage you to start having as far as when it comes to phones and social media. You've heard our conversations, but we would encourage you to be thinking about, one, your own heart and life. But if you're parents, I think it's something that You can't just sort of go with the culture on. I think it's something this book would say you need to be thinking about that, talking about it. Again, we would say talk about it, think about it from a biblical worldview, with God being your creator and the Word of God being our guide. You don't got to throw out don't throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing, right? Like, it doesn't mean social media and iPhones are super bad and they're destroying everything, right? Like, we know that's our heart. We know that's sin. And our kids are going to have to use them at some moment. But so we want to help guide those. And even in those moments, if you follow things like don't give them social media till 16, I guarantee you're going to have conversations about things they're going to see on there after 16, right? And that's in a discipleship moment, or you're going to find them looking at things that you didn't think they would go down because you had all these boundaries up, and you got to have those conversations with them. So it's just a discipleship journey. That's what I hope you take away from our 2-part conversation here about the anxious generation, is that this is just a discipleship journey that we're walking along with our kids, with our own hearts and life, but with our kids. And we want to make sure that you're having this conversation, and that ultimately the conversation isn't coming back to a set of rules, but it's coming back to the grace of God. It's coming back to a discipleship of, when I stand before the Lord someday, I can say, with what I knew, I did the best that I could to point my kids towards Jesus, towards good habits that would build them towards a relationship with the Lord. And so I think this book and our conversation hopefully helps our church family towards that end. So thank you for joining us on this. Again, we've never done this before. So this is the first time we've ever discussed a book or talked about it. But I did feel it was important for our church family to have this conversation, again, as we live in a world saturated with iPhones, with phones, with social media. Just wanted to make sure we're discipling our kids well, discipling our own hearts well, so that we can be a church family that's leading generations to make disciples of Jesus Christ everywhere. So thanks for joining us today.